Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's a hard act to follow. So for those who don't know me, I'm Christian Baer from Schellman. I'm a technical fellow, and kind of laughing to myself, technical in the title. There's some heavy hitters in this room, so I'm really excited to be here. And I know I've spoken to many of you, and looking forward to to catching up with people in the break and at the happy hour. But I'm here and appreciate SunStone inviting me to talk about FedRAMP 20x from the 3PAO perspective. Seeing who's in the room now, I'm realizing some of this may be a little too high level, but I think we can, especially over the breaks and happy hour, kind of get more into the meat of things. But I'll just kind of talk at a high level about some of what we're seeing as a 3PAO when it comes to 20x. And there's me. All right, I guess just before I get into 20x, just a little background about myself. So I'm on the federal team at Schellman, so we do FedRAMP assessments, we do GovRAMP, CMMC, CGIS, really anything that's federal adjacent. So we live, eat, and breathe security controls. Just as far as my background goes, I used to work as a DoD contractor on an audit team, and actually we didn't even have a SIM tool. It was a manual audit team where we literally had to connect to Windows machines, go to Event Viewer, export the logs, do a manual review. So I have a long history of doing things manually. And then after that role, I moved in. I was a federal contractor for many years, supporting a federal agency with all things FISMA. So that's where I really learned kind of the ins and outs of FISMA, the pain points, the things that I liked, dislikes, and then started off on the implementer side, so supporting ISSOs with implementing controls, and then moving over to the assessment side, so learning about what it's like to be in the other seat, where you're actually actually validating that controls are implemented. And then from there, obviously moved to Schellman, and I've been with Schellman for almost 4 years. So I've almost been exclusively living, eating, breathing FedRAMP now for the last four years. So as far as 20x goes, I know the majority of us in the room have either been on the working groups or have been kind of tracking the late breaking news. Almost every day there's something new. But the idea is that with the shakeup in the federal government and reductions in staff, FedRAMP is undergoing a major overhaul with this FedRAMP 20x effort. So just that's really what this is all about. Where for many years FedRAMP has been criticized for just how slow things are, how manual it is, how expensive it is, the barrier to entry, things like shadow requirements, things that aren't documented very well. So it's a very manual process. I know Mike from Kratos is in the room. I'm sure you've filled in many test cases manually yourself. You understand the length of time, and then beyond just develop the time it takes to build out your package, but the time it would take the agencies to review the package, and then the FedRAMP PMO had to do their package review. So I know we've seen it could take over 2 years just for a CSP to get an authorization decision, which that puts them in a tough spot. They've obviously invested all this money into FedRAMP, and then they're having to wait 2 years to get that full FedRAMP authorization. So those of us that are working in FedRAMP, we know that there's obviously room for improvement. So I know that this is really evolving, so there's things we know, there's things we don't know, but as far as what we do know, we know that FedRAMP was codified into law, which is great because I know a lot of things were on the chopping block. So it's great that FedRAMP was not part of that. So it's backed by law, regulation, policy. It's undergoing reform, but not going away. And the PMO is really taking a step back. So we've seen where packages that we've submitted have gone through what previously would take maybe over a year to get some type of feedback. We're now seeing that some packages are going through with minimal feedback, or if it's just administrative updates that are needed, the PMO is not necessarily standing in the way of granting that full FedRAMP authorization. So that's one immediate impact we've seen. Also for the readiness assessments, there used to be a much higher level of scrutiny. Those appear to be going through the FedRAMP PMO review much quicker. So that's And also another area where the PMO is stepping back is what we're seeing is the PMO no longer wants to maintain that centralized repository. So pre-20x, I know many of us were kind of waiting to see with FedRAMP's platform what that was going to look like. And I'm not sure if any of you all attended any of the listening sessions on that, but we were able to kind of share what some of our pain points about interactions with the FedRAMP PMO, what were some improvements that we could suggest. But it sounds like that's no longer the vision, where the PMO no longer want to have that centralized repository. And then lastly, empowering agencies to make risk decisions. So with 20x, it appears that what the vision is that agencies are going to be, they can no longer just rely on the fact that something's FedRAMP authorized. The FedRAMP PMO really wants agencies to really come to the table, be more vocal about what data that they need to make informed risk decisions. So that appears to be a big part of this vision. And then some of the myths. So there was chatter when 20x was first announced that agency sponsorship was totally going away, which is not true. There's still the traditional path to a FedRAMP authorization with an agency sponsor. For most CSPs, FedRAMP's not really changing much in the short term. And there's also requirements that are built on FedRAMP, so things like CMMC and FedRAMP Plus, so DoD, IO4, IO5, or state ramp government. So at least as of now, those aren't yet changing. And then there's also the concept of FedRAMP equivalency. So that was something the DoD put into place as far as, if for CSPs that did not have a sponsor, they could basically have a 3PAO perform an assessment against the FedRAMP audit requirements. And if they had no findings, they could be considered FedRAMP equivalent. So, but that, as far as we know, is not yet changing. So I kind of almost wish I could go at the end of the day, because I feel like I'm here to learn from you all about some of the opportunities, particularly around OSCAL. And again, we can probably get more into things when in the breaks or happy hour. I'd like to geek out a bit, but I mean, some of it I think is obvious for this audience. Things like machine-readable artifacts, automated validation. So I guess for automated validations, I think what excites me, and I can't speak for all three PALs, but I can speak for myself. One long criticism of FedRAMP is that, I know that Brian Conrad, former director, would say that, FedRAMP was designed to be guardrails. So, I mean, there's so many different service models. There's so many agencies have a variety of different missions. So it's hard to get too prescriptive. But as an auditor, an assessor, I think there are scenarios where being more prescriptive would be helpful. I know that's long been a criticism of FedRAMP, is that CSPs don't necessarily know what's the expectation for a given security control. So that's one thing I'm hoping will come out of 20x, is it'll really spawn some discussions on, what's the expectation for this control? I know one example is CISA put out the SCUBA baselines, and I know a lot of agencies were excited about that because they were very prescriptive, and they would say, okay, for Office 365, here's the settings that we recommend that you set to be more secure. And so I think having some more, being a little more prescriptive, I think will help, because I know it's long been a challenge that if you're not if you don't have a strong advisor or consultant, or you're not working with a 3PAO that has a lot of FedRAMP experience, there'd be a lot of things that could trip you up along the way. What the PMO calls showstoppers. So if you didn't, and it's difficult sometimes because CSPs will ask us, well, where is that documented? And we'd have to pull out an email and say, oh, well, this was from an email we have from 2 years ago. But so that's, I am interested in what comes out of 20x as far as being more prescriptive. And then obviously machine-readable artifacts, I don't need to convince anyone that there are advantages here. I think for us, where I think that would help us is, obviously when we're authoring documents in a package, an assessment package, there's obviously there's the security assessment plan, there's the risk exposure table, there's the SAR, and there's information that's copied between all those different documents. So let's say a CSP remediates a finding, there's multiple places you have to go to make those updates. So those are some of the things I'm excited about, is just being able to be more efficient. I know in talking to Brian Ruffier at one of the OSCAL meetups, he was mentioning that the PMO spent so much time just reviewing the consistency of packages. And that's a challenge on our side as well as a 3PAO, is just trying to ensure that packages are complete, they're consistent, they're accurate. As an assessor, I'd much rather spend my time getting to the meat, actually being able to identify true risks. I think that's our role, is to add value, is being able to do that deep analysis, actually finding risks and spending less time trying to make sure that the package is consistent, it's accurate. Of course, that's important, but I'd love to offload that to machines who could obviously do that portion of it better. And then I know we were just talking about reciprocity with other frameworks. That's something that is obviously of interest to 3PAOs, because a lot of us we assess against a lot of those different frameworks, and we get the disgruntled CSPs who say, you're asking me about MFA. I just did this last month with it could even be another team at Schellman. So I would love to see more reciprocity with frameworks, so that like Anka was talking about, where we could be assessing just those deltas, and I think that would create a better package in the end. It would give us the ability to really dig in and find true risks. And lastly, just the note I had was the ability to share data in a more streamlined manner. So we deliver the assessment package to the PMO. I mean, the agency has to receive the package. Then there's other agencies that want to leverage that package. So there's a lot of moving data back and forth. And so obviously, things like machine-readable artifacts could make that process a lot easier. And then the other note I had was just offering an alternative authorization path without the need for an agency sponsor. So that would obviously open up additional opportunities for 3PAOs. So I know that's long been one of the criticisms of FedRAMP, is the fact that you need an agency sponsor. And so I think with something like 20x, that could definitely open up opportunities for other CSPs. And then I feel like this could go, I know I attended the OSCAL Foundation launch, and there was that FedRAMP panel, and it really got me thinking about all of the different use cases that I'd never had even thought of. I know Peruz, you were on the panel, and Brian and Travis from Brexit talking about things like just even the opportunity to take things like CIS benchmarks or STIGs and take customer responsibility matrices or customer compliance guides from AWS and convert those to OSCAL, and that opens up, I think, a lot of opportunities where it just seems very repetitive that CSPs have to do the same hardening over and over again. Where I think there's a great opportunity I feel like OSCAL is just the beginning. I mean, there's going to be things here that I think for 3PAOs that we want to get out of living in spreadsheets. We'd love to do things in a more automated manner. We'd love to be able to add more value by being able to spend more time on the most impactful security controls. So those are just some of my initial thoughts. But again, if you ask me this question at the end of the day, I'd probably have some maybe totally different answer. But those were just some of the my initial thoughts. So as far as unknowns, I know many of us are in these working groups. We're on the GitHub discussion boards. We're trying to make heads or tails of this. So we see that there is a vision, but the implementation plan and timelines are not yet known. We're not certain about how the commercial frameworks will integrate with federal requirements. I know we've done many consolidated assessments where if a CSP has to meet FedRAMP and has to meet SOC or PCI or ISO, you run into a lot of challenges with scoping. I think the point was made earlier about sometimes you might have a commercial environment and a federal environment, so there's limited opportunity to leverage testing. But I know part of the FedRAMP modernization memo was, there was supposed to be this kind of push to no longer require CSPs to have a dedicated federal environment. I think that is a great. I'm hoping that things do trend that way, because I think that will make some of these efforts of reciprocity a lot easier if you no longer have to have this dedicated federal environment. I know there's the FedRAMP PMO has a request for comment out now on an updated authorization boundary guidance, and it's a pretty big overhaul from what it was. And so I think, from that sense, things are definitely changing as far as what portions of your system will when FedRAMP authorization will be needed for certain tools or services or portions of your system. And then Lastly, willingness and ability of agencies to adopt new processes. So, like I said, I used to be a federal contractor, and so, my experience in government was that every agency is so different. Some agencies are very particular. They have particular templates. They have their way of doing things, and that might not mesh with what another agency is doing. So I know that's always been one of the challenges of the FedRAMP model, is trying to leverage another authorization package when maybe you as an agency have your own unique needs, or maybe there's sticking points that, something that is not acceptable to you that is acceptable to other agencies. So that's just something that at this point is, from our perspective, is still unknown. Of course, agencies are experiencing their own challenges with reductions in staff. So, we certainly know that there's just a lot of things are in flux right now.